You are watching The World 24/7 on the NDTV network. I'm Parmeshwar Bawa. Let's begin with the top stories you need to know. Concerns about all-out regional war are once again rising after a projectile fell on a football field in a Druze community in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights, killing 12 children and young people and injuring 30 others. Hezbollah emphatically denied being responsible, but Israel has blamed the Lebanese group for the deadly attack. External Affairs Minister S Jaishankar arrived in Japan on Sunday for a two-day visit for the Quad Foreign Ministers meeting. Dr. Jaishankar held wide-ranging talks with his American counterpart, Antony Blinken, against the backdrop of an unease in India-US ties following Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Russia 3 weeks ago. US presidential nominees Donald Trump and Kamala Harris have started their political battle targeting undecided voters in swing states. With election day just over 3 months away, the race is heating up. Which way are voters leaning in the US? We get you the details. Russian President Vladimir Putin has warned the United States against the deployment of long-range missiles in Germany, saying Moscow in that case would restart production of intermediate-range nuclear weapons and station similar missiles within striking distance of the West. Well, our big focus, tensions between Israel and Hezbollah are threatening to erupt into open warfare after rockets fired from Lebanon killed a dozen people in the occupied Golan Heights. Most victims were children or teenagers struck when rockets actually hit a soccer field. The Israeli military launched a series of airstrikes across Lebanon overnight, but those were routine strikes that have become a daily phenomenon for months now. The White House has issued a statement saying the horrific strike was from a Hezbollah rocket launched from an area the group controls.
חיזבאללה שליחה של איראן באזור. חיזבאללה לא ינקה מהאירוע הזה, גם בהכחשות המגוחכות שלו. הוא ירה את הירי, הוא יישא במחיר, והוא ישלם מחיר כבד על פעולותיו.
Well, lots of developments lately. In fact, there is a serious concern whether this regional escalation is going to be now a full-out conflict, a war indeed. Tensions between Israel and Hezbollah are threatening to erupt into open warfare. This is what experts and analysts have also predicted after rockets fired from Lebanon killed a dozen people in the occupied Golan Heights. As I mentioned earlier, the rocket strike killed 12 children, some of them teenagers. Most victims were children or teenagers, and these rockets struck a soccer field. The Israeli military launched a series of airstrikes across Lebanon overnight, and in fact, those were routine strikes that have become a daily phenomenon for a while now. As far as the US is concerned, the White House has issued a statement saying the horrific strike was from a Hezbollah rocket launched from an area the group controls. But you know, now many analysts have said Israel and Hezbollah are not interested in an all-out war due to the mass displacement of their populations along conflict lines and because of how lengthy the fighting has become. I must also mention to our viewers that Al Jazeera, a Kuwaiti newspaper, is reporting that Iran has supplied Hezbollah and other Iranian proxy forces with electromagnetic ordnance, which, for the benefit of our viewers, I must mention, can disable communication systems and has shut down radars too. So the tensions between Israel and Hezbollah are indeed threatening to erupt into open warfare after rockets fired from Lebanon have killed a dozen people, most of them children or teenagers. The Israel Defense Minister has said that Hezbollah will pay a heavy price. Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, has condemned this attack as tensions escalate between Israel and Hezbollah. The Israeli military launched a series of airstrikes. This was across Lebanon overnight, but those were actually routine strikes that have become a daily phenomenon for months now. The US has called this a horrific strike, and they have said that the strike was from a Hezbollah rocket that was launched from an area the group actually controls. I must also mention that the Israeli military claims it found evidence at the scene that shows an Iranian-made rocket fell on the football pitch. But it is the deadliest strike since Israel-Hezbollah's fight began. The defense minister in Israel saying Hezbollah will indeed pay a heavy price. Right, if you're just tuning in, let me bring you up to speed with the big story we're tracking at the moment. Tensions between Israel and Hezbollah are threatening to erupt into open warfare. This is after rockets fired from Lebanon killed a dozen people in the occupied Golan Heights. The most tragic thing being that this deadly attack, most victims were actually children or teenagers. And the Israel defense minister has said that they will retaliate and Hezbollah will pay a heavy price. Now, for further clarity on the current situation, we have with us Dinkar Patel, former ambassador, joining us. Thank you so much, sir, for making time for us on the World 24/7. The Israeli military claims that it found evidence at the scene that shows an Iranian-made rocket fell on the football pitch. Now, sir, would you say concerns about all-out regional war are once again rising? Sir, am I audible to you?
Hello.
Right, we seem to be having an issue with that audio line. While we just quickly fix that, the Israeli military has claimed that it found evidence at the scene that shows an Iranian-made rocket fell on the football pitch. The strike is on a soccer field in Golan Heights, and it's killed 12 children and teens. I must also mention that we have a reaction from the White House, and they have said that this was a horrific strike. It was from a Hezbollah rocket, and it was launched from an area that the group controls. Other big story that we're tracking, External Affairs Minister Dr. S Jaishankar arrived in Japan on Sunday for a two-day visit for the Quad Foreign Ministers meeting. Dr. Jaishankar held wide-ranging talks with his American counterpart, Antony Blinken, against the backdrop of an unease in India-US ties following Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Russia 3 weeks ago. But Mr. Jaishankar and Blinken are in Tokyo to attend a meeting of the foreign ministers of the four-nation grouping Quad or Quadrilateral Coalition today. And as you know, the Quad is a diplomatic partnership between Australia, India, Japan and the United States, committed to supporting an open, stable and prosperous Indo-Pacific that is inclusive and resilient. Now, the talks between the External Affairs Minister and the US Secretary of State also came amid Washington consistently seeking accountability from New Delhi in the case relating to the alleged foiled plot to kill Sikh extremist Gurpatwant Singh Pannu in New York. Now, it's not immediately clear whether Prime Minister Modi's visit to Russia and the murder for hire plot figured in the Jaishankar-Blinken talks. But Ghazali has been keeping a close eye on all the developments. In fact, he's also tracking the first Quad meeting since the Israel-Hamas war. Right. He will be joining us over the phone line in a few moments, but regional and international issues as far as economic security is expected to be the key focus at this Quad meeting. Dr. Jaishankar has already held wide-ranging talks with Antony Blinken, his American counterpart, against the backdrop of an unease in India-US ties, as one top official in the US just a week ago had commented regarding Prime Minister Modi's visit to Russia and the optics of Prime Minister Modi's visit with Vladimir Putin. Dr. Jaishankar and Antony Blinken, now in Tokyo, to attend a meeting of the foreign ministers of the four-nation grouping, the Quadrilateral Coalition, today. Mohammad Ghazali is tracking this visit very closely. He joins us over the phone line at the moment. Ghazali, take us through Dr. Jaishankar's plan of action as far as this Quad summit is concerned.
See, he has already met the U.S. Secretary of State, Mr. Antony Blinken, and we had seen that how in U.S.-India relations had taken a kind of a hit in the last couple of weeks with back-and-forth comments coming in from the United States over Mr. Modi's visit to Russia and the way he was received there, the way he met Mr. Putin there. Now, in the Quad, we know that it's an informal group, which is not a security group, but the main aim of the Quad was to counter China's growing influence in the Asia-Pacific region. But very interesting developments have taken place in the last couple of days with Mr. Jaishankar and his counterpart in China. They both met on the sidelines of ASEAN summit in Laos just a couple of days ago. In both the countries, they spoke about mutual cooperation, mutual interest, and to strengthen and deepen the ties and reduce the friction between the two countries. Now, it will be interesting to see that how India will react to Chinese growing influence in the Asia-Pacific during the Quad Forum. The other important angle to see, or the other important issue to notice, would be that all the other partners in Quad, except India, have their own reservations on the Russia-Ukraine war. So India, there is a growing pressure on India to show that India is a neutral player, and it is also siding with Ukraine as well. And that is why Indian Prime Minister is very likely to visit Ukraine the very next month. So the global pressure on India to show that it is not siding with Russia was growing, and to counter that, India has very smartly played its diplomacy by planning a visit of Prime Minister to the Ukraine. Now, Russia-Ukraine war, as well as growing influence of China in the Asia-Pacific, will certainly be the key focus area besides security and the global conflict issue going around for this Quad summit.
As always, Ghazali, thanks so much for joining us with the latest. We will, of course, revert to you for regular updates regarding the Quad summit. Well, in other crucial news, the United States will overhaul its military forces in Japan. As the two countries move to deepen defense cooperation, the leaders of the respective nations have confirmed. This is a sweeping step to modernize their alliance in the face of mounting security threats in Asia. The United States will actually overhaul its military forces in Japan as the two countries have decided to deepen their defense cooperation. The announcement comes as Japan and the US are becoming increasingly cautious about a region where China is seen as increasingly aggressive in asserting its disputed territorial claims, and North Korea continues its illegal weapons program, while both tighten ties with Russia as it wages war in Ukraine. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and their Japanese counterparts Minoru Kihara and Yoko Kamikawa announced the plan in a joint statement following a meeting in Tokyo, where they also called China's political, economic, and military coercion the greatest strategic challenge in the Asia-Pacific region and beyond. Well, let's turn our attention now to what's happening as far as the US elections are concerned. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are entering the last 100 days of one of the fastest moving and least predictable campaign seasons in memory, after a historic month in the run-up to the 2024 presidential race in the United States. The ground has shifted under both political parties since the 27th of June debate, when Joe Biden's poor performance with Trump threw the Democratic Party into chaos and also prompted Trump's team to eye an expanded electoral map. The race was rattled yet again after the former president survived an assassination attempt in Pennsylvania. Just days later, he actually chose the senator from Ohio, J.D. Vance, as his running mate and rallied the Republican Party at its convention in Milwaukee. Then, Joe Biden stepped down from the Democratic ticket. As of now, which way are voters leaning in the U.S.? Well, here's how things stand at the moment.
U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris's whirlwind entry into the U.S. elections race, uniting the Democratic Party after President Biden's exit, has been a boost to the Democrats. Recent opinion polls show Harris is almost caught up with Trump, but all is not smooth sailing. At 59, Harris is comparatively youthful compared with Biden's ripe age of 81 and Donald Trump, who is 78. Harris has garnered massive support on social media platforms like TikTok since her campaign began. From memes to reels set to pop songs, the Harris campaign is connecting with youth voters, which the Biden campaign failed to do so. In the Times Siena poll, while Harris and Trump are head-to-head among registered voters, Harris holds a substantial lead among voters between the ages of 18 to 29, with 56% of youth voters supporting the Democratic presumptive nominee. Trump leads among the older demographic of voters, with 43% backing the former president. Harris fares better among groups that Biden had been the weakest in, leading with 57% of support from Hispanic voters, while Trump leads among white voters with 56% backing the former president. In the latest CNN SRS survey too, Harris and Trump remain head-to-head among registered voters. Yet, unlike the Times poll, among young voters and Hispanic voters, Trump is just marginally behind, highlighting how close the elections is. The Trump campaign is also seeing radical changes. Unlike his first term, the former president is now embracing cryptocurrency and has laid a roadmap for the same. With just 100 days left in the U.S. polls, the race is heating up. Though the Democrat convention next month is unlikely to throw any surprises, all eyes are on who could be Harris's vice presidential pick. With Disha Bakchi, Bureau Report, NDTV World.
Switching tracks, Russian President Vladimir Putin has warned the United States that if Washington deployed long-range missiles in Germany, then Russia would station similar missiles in striking distance of the West. The United States said on the 10th of July that it would start deploying long-range missiles, and then Germany from 2026, actually in preparation for a long-term deployment that will include SM-6 Tomahawk cruise missiles and developmental hypersonic weapons as well. Now, in a speech to sailors from Russia, China, Algeria and India to mark Russian Navy Day in the former imperial capital of St. Petersburg, Putin warned the United States that it risked triggering a Cold War-style missile crisis with the move. In fact, to quote Putin, he said, "The flight time to targets on our territory of such missiles, which in the future may be equipped with nuclear warheads, will be about 10 minutes.
Таких ракет, которые в перспективе могут быть оснащены и ядерными боеголовками, составит порядка 10 минут. Уважаемые граждане России, при этом ранее в ходе учения США уже отработали переброску ракетных комплексов Dark Typhoon со своей территории в Данию и на Филиппины. Такая ситуация напоминает события времен Холодной войны.
Well, for further clarity on the global ramifications, we have with us former chairperson of the Center for Russian and Central Asian Studies at JNU, Professor Anuradha Janoi. Thank you so much, Professor, for making time for us. Russian and US diplomats say that diplomatic relations are worse even than during the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. And both Moscow and Washington have urged de-escalation, while both have also made steps towards escalation. Help our viewers decode what's going on, Professor.
Look, this war in Ukraine between Ukraine and Russia, but actually Ukraine is backed by all 32 members and especially the US. It's a proxy war. That has been gradually escalating over the past 2 years, especially because Russia is clearly winning. They've got about 23-24% of the Ukrainian earlier territory is now with Russia, and every day they're making gains. And this is making NATO and the US very tense. They don't want to lose this war. It'll be a big blow on NATO. And so now they're deploying these nuclear missiles, which earlier the US itself had said was a no-no because it can lead to a third world war. And it can. And now Putin has reacted and said that just like the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, when the Soviet Union at that time and the US almost pressed on the nuclear button, but there was good diplomacy, especially from President Kennedy at that time, and it was de-escalated. Putin is warning that unless there's a very clear de-escalation, this can lead to that missile crisis, and it's much worse. Number one, the nuclear weaponry is much more advanced than the 60s and the earlier Cold War. And second, the distance between Germany, where they want to place these nuclear missiles facing Moscow and St. Petersburg, which would lead to complete annihilation, they said they would retaliate and put nuclear missiles facing Germany, which will lead to mutually assured destruction. Now, the US Defense Secretary Austin did speak to the Russian Defense Secretary Belousov, saying we need to manage and de-escalate, but no steps have been taken. This managed de-escalation is extremely important negotiations are extremely important, also because the earlier treaties which were in place since the 80s and 90s, like the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, START, the Strategic Control Treaties, the disarmament, they have all been dismantled. And the relations between Russia and the US are much worse than they were during the first Cold War. So this new second Cold War, the officials are not taking the name, but Putin has, is much more dangerous. It's dangerous for the world.
Indeed.
And I think all world leaders, especially the important ones, need to tell them to put the brakes and start diplomacy.
Indeed. Putin did repeat an earlier warning that Russia could resume production of intermediate and shorter range nuclear capable missiles as well, and then consider where to deploy them after the United States brought similar missiles to Europe and Asia. There are serious global implications. Thank you so much, as always, Professor Janoi, for joining us on the World 24/7. With that, we're slipping into a very short break. News and updates continue in a moment. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. The Middle East braced for a potential flare-up in violence after Israeli authorities said a rocket from Lebanon struck a soccer field in the Israeli-controlled Golan Heights, killing 12 children and teens in what the military called the deadliest attack on civilians since the 7th of October. It raised fears of a broader regional war between Israel and Hezbollah, which in a rare move denied it was responsible. Now, for further clarity on what to expect and the global ramifications currently, we have with us Dinkar Patel, former ambassador. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. Now, the Israeli military claims it found evidence at the scene that shows an Iranian-made rocket fell on the football pitch. Would you say concerns about an all-out regional war are once again rising? I mean, analysts have for months warned that any miscalculations could trigger an all-out conflict.
Before I answer the question, I think it's important to have an inquiry about the origin of the attack, because Hezbollah has denied responsibility. I do not think there's any risk of a major escalation. No side wants it. Israel does not want a two-front war till they have got a truce deal, and truce deal is in a very delicate stage. So I don't think this opening a new front at this stage suits them. Hezbollah does not want a war.
In fact,
they want to keep the temperature high, but they don't want to risk an all-out war, which will also bring an internal Lebanese reaction against Hezbollah. And of course, none of the regional actors want a war. So let's hope that the situation can be diffused.
Right. In fact, many analysts have said that Israel and Hezbollah are not interested in an all-out war due to the mass displacement of their populations along war lines and because of how lengthy the fighting has become. But you know, sir, the Kuwaiti newspaper Al Jazeera is reporting that Iran has supplied Hezbollah and other Iranian proxy forces with electromagnetic ordnance which can disable communication systems and essentially shut down radars. How do you think such a threat should be addressed? Israel and the US have accused Iran-backed militia of actually carrying out Saturday's strike, but this specific threat of the electromagnetic ordnance, what is it and how worried should one be?
You know, it's called electromagnetic pulse, EMP.
Right.
But, you know, this has been much in news lately, but it has not happened anywhere. And let's even assuming for a moment that that Iran is supplying arms, I don't think they have an interest in escalating it to a level where they are drawn into a war. So I would not attach too much of importance to this kind of newspaper report.
Well, thank you so much, sir, for joining us with those quick comments. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu just back from his visit to Washington, and his defense minister, they will decide on the character and time of retaliation. That's what they have said. With that, we're slipping into a very short break. Thank you so much for investing your time in watching this edition of The World 24/7. Do stay tuned.